Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Narona. So we are going to be starting with the talk by Dr. Shailaja Menon, just a slight change in the program. The first two talks are interchanged in slots. So I'd just like to give a brief introduction, before Shailaja starts her talk. So Shailaja is an expert in language and literacy, not an exaggeration to say that she's a global expert. And her research interests have been also about language and literacy in the Indian context. So Shailaja got her PhD from the University of Michigan and also taught for a number of years in the University of Colorado before moving to TIS, Hyderabad, where, of course, she led a number of programs in language and literacy. And more recently, she has been at the Azim Premji University for over a decade on the faculty there. Until she left a year or a year and a half ago to join Tata Trust. So at Tata Trust, of course, she's leading the Center of Excellence in Early Language and Literacy. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us, Shailaja. And, to tell you the truth, this has all been very short notice. So we're really happy. And, she was the one who really introduced us to some of the community who, we could profitably interact with. So thank you, Shailaja, and please come.
Okay. So once again, good morning, everybody. This is a longish talk. So I hope you'll have the patience to listen to it. The context of the talk is that IITB has developed this app called TATA, which uses automated speech recognition technology to get various indicators of fluency. And they have collected and analyzed data on from over 1 lakh students from 1,200 KVs all across the country, which is very exciting for people like us who have always been waiting for this kind of a large data set. So extremely exciting news. But also, I'm an educator. I come at it from the perspective of an educator. So I'm going to just sort of lay the grounds of what I believe fluency is, where I believe it fits in, and how I believe we should interpret or use apps like this. So that is where my talk is going. Okay, so the outline of my talk is that firstly, I'm going to sort of I hope that it's not boring for all of you, because I'm just going to assume that people don't know what fluency is. Some of you may know a lot, some of you may know less, but I'm just starting at the very beginning. What is fluency? From the perspective of pedagogy, how can we understand where fluency fits in? And from the perspective of curriculum, how does fluency fit in? So I'm speaking as an educator at this point. So the first part is just trying to understand what it is. So TATA app measures, assesses fluency. So what do we mean by fluency and what role does it play? So that's the first point that I'm going to establish. And why is it important? Also, it's a very, very hot topic in this country today. If you go to any state, if you talk to NGOs, everybody's after fluency data. So why is it such a hot topic at this moment in our country? It's very relevant, it's very significant. Everybody will tell you that. So this kind of change, perhaps, people like Shakti Brata and all have been working on this for over a decade in this country, but it got a nice fillip when the NEP 2020 sort of put its focus on foundational literacy and said this is really important to this country to make sure that children are reading and writing. And right after that, the government put out this Nipun Bharat program, which basically gave some indicators of fluency as being really important to accomplish. The minute the government put out these guidelines, it just became, it is like a forest fire all across the country. So today it is very, very pertinent to be talking about. They put out these kind of guidelines that say grade 1 child should be able to read 30 to 35 words correctly per minute. If I say WCPM, that means words read correctly per minute. Grade 2 child should be able to read 45 to 60, and at the end of grade 3, children should be able to read 60 words correctly per minute. This kind of a broad guideline came from Nipun Bharat. So if you actually look at the Nipun Bharat benchmarks a little more carefully, they are not talking just about fluency. They are talking about oral language development. They are talking about various reading benchmark indicators. For example, finding information. The child should be able to find information in familiar books. The child should be able to read and follow instructions, etc., etc. But the human mind is such, it's not anybody's fault. When you give us a very complex portrait of what children should be able to do or what teachers should be able to do, we go for the more easiest and most tangible and most quantifiable measure that there is. This is just the way our minds work as human beings. So we went for one thing out of all the things. As you can see, this is the complete list of benchmarks that Nipun Bharat has put, but our eyes were caught by what I've highlighted over there, which is reads 60 words correctly per minute. So now we know what children should be able to do at grade 3. The rest of it is blah, 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 blah. 60 words per minute. So we are good with that, right? So that is how it has been interpreted. And it's not an exaggeration that it's being interpreted exactly like this. So in this context, especially, we should ask ourselves, what is fluency? See, this baby and bathwater analogy. There is a baby there, but there's a lot of bathwater. So how do we make sense of the baby and the bathwater with fluency? What is fluency? How does it contribute to early reading? And are we all understanding its significance somewhat correctly? I don't mean to say correct, incorrect in any absolute sense, but approximately approaching something that is reasonable. So I'm just going with a definition, and then I'll deconstruct the definition a little bit for you. So what is fluency? If I ask people around the room, people who have been working with fluency, they will each give their own definitions of it, and all of it will be partially correct, because it's like the blind men and the elephant in the room. Ek ko poonch हाथ में आया एक को पाव. तो वैसे ही मेरा भी ये blind definition है. I do not say this is very comprehensive. This is one definition of fluency, which is that the most important characteristic of the fluent reader is the ability to decode. Decode means to read the words correctly. Decode means to read words correctly. So a fluent reader should be able to read the words correctly and understand the text at the same time. This is one definition. At the same time, a fluent reader, if I'm fluent, I read and I understand what I'm reading. That is a definition we'll keep in mind. It's not my definition. It is a definition given by J. Samuels, who's one of the fathers of fluency research. So where did this idea that a child to be fluent should be able to decode and understand, where did this idea come from, that this is important to reading? Actually, you can trace this idea to the early part of the 20th century, but I will not take you that far back because I know your attention span and my time is limited. So let us start with 1974, when LaBerge and Samuels, J. Samuels, who I just cited, came up with something called, articulated something called automaticity theory. And automaticity theory is very simple. It says that the human brain can only do one thing at a time, unless we alternate between doing two things. So let us say I'm cooking and I'm talking to my friend on the phone. So either I'm focusing on frying the onion and I've lost track of what my friend is saying, or I'm listening to my friend and the onion has burnt. In any activity, it is not just in reading. We can alternate, or else we have become so automatic with one that we can do it without conscious attention. That is automaticity theory. And LaBerge and Samuels were the first to sort of articulate it in the context of reading and say that there are at least two tasks that readers need to do when they're reading. One is to figure out the aksharas and the words and how to read, and the other is to understand what they're reading. So if we are not fluent, we will focus so much on the aksharas and the sounds and the word reading that we just forget to make meaning of it. So we have to, in order for children to be able to understand what they're reading, we have to make this akshara and word level reading that automatic, that no attention needs to be given. So you're driving and you're talking to your friend. Now driving has become so automatic that you can talk to your friend and really engage with what the friend is saying. So that's a bad analogy. No, I meant hands-free and all of that. Huh? not that you're driving and talking on the phone. I didn't mean to. Yeah. So that kind of a thing. Otherwise, children, when they are, so this is like, let us say a non-fluent reader here and a fluent reader there, most of their brain, this is not me saying this is LaBerge and Samuel's theory I'm giving you. Most of their brain is caught up with Ramakana, and they're reading like this, and they're not understanding anything that they're reading. So most of their cognitive capacity is going into the red part, which is decoding, and so very little is available for understanding. So this is their theory. So on the other hand, when very little is occupied of the cognitive capacity by decoding, then much more resources are there for meaning making and all of that. So that is one reason why fluency, that is when fluency theory, automaticity theory came to the uh, central attention, although as I'm saying its roots are earlier in the century, that this is really important. And then people after that were able to show that there's a very significant correlation between fluency and comprehension. So if the child is, the more fluent they are, the more they are understanding, and if they are less fluent, their understanding is. So multiple studies, body of research, which I'm not citing here, that establishes the correlation between fluency and comprehension. So then it became very, very important to early literacy people. How do we make children fluent? So that is where this idea comes from. I just wanted to give you a background. But let's do a small exercise now. Bear with me. I'd like you to try to read this passage. I mean, in your minds, you don't need to read it aloud. I won't judge your, assess your fluency. Is it easy? Just a quick round. Is, it doesn't make sense. You can read it easily, fluently. You want to try, Nagesh? Just without understanding, read it fluently, no?
Na Nadrazi, Pan Novak, Stoji, Na. I don't even know. I don't want to.
All right. I mean,
Someone, sorry.
so what is making it hard for you all? Can we just like 2-3 people? What is making it easy or hard or whatever it is? What makes it easy? What makes it hard? You can respond in any way you like. You can't make sense of it. Yeah. You're not even able to decode it. Let's say decode and comprehend, just for the sake of this conversation.
Maybe while we were reading, we were trying to comprehend the text also simultaneously, so we found it difficult.
You were trying to comprehend it,
Yeah,
and you
maybe.
couldn't. So that was really difficult for you. Anything else? You are not able to predict it because you don't know it, right? Any other comment? Some letters and syllables. Can you give me an example of that?
DNES. So
Yeah, I mean, what on earth is that? Yeah. I mean, and yeah, correct. And if you give me VLA, there's only one word that comes to my mind, which is a name, right? Right? I mean, that's right. That's the only one that comes to my mind. Yeah, I mean, these are very unfamiliar letter configurations. It is not just the meaning of the oral language. So in no way am I able to predictably read this well. This is Czechoslovakian Czech language. This is the same, I mean, yeah.
without prior knowledge,
Huh.
it would be easy to read. With prior knowledge of English, we try to match and read.
Correct. Absolutely. No prior knowledge. Did you find his reading to be exciting, like compelling for you to listen to? It was kind of flat, was it not? Didn't it sound just like the young children reading who are not fluent? So there was also lack of expression prosody in his reading. Why do you think he lacked prosody? Yeah, he had no clue what he was reading, so he didn't know what tone to take. Should he be angry? Should he be happy? Should he be surprised? Should he be sad? He had no clue. So all of these things are part of it. And this is, by the way, just I got it off the internet. Learn Czech in easy passages. That is, so it is just one of those early passages of Czech learning. Is this a little easier on you, Nagesh? You can read with prosody? Yeah? Yes. And what makes this easier? You know the language. Anything that remains difficult here, or it's super easy still?
Yeah, the accent marks.
Yeah,
Just a
absolutely.
request to everyone who's speaking, please turn on your mics for the benefit of the online
The
audience.
online participants. Yeah, so I won't stretch this example out. I'll move on. I just want to point out that we knew the script here also. I mean, except for the accent marks, by and large, we knew like 90% of the script, but yet we struggled with it. And this is because, it is not just the script that impacts decoding, but also the orthography, which some of you, orthography means the spelling patterns. It's just a fancy name for spelling patterns. So for example, we do not have VLA kind of orthography. We do not have D and E. Do we have English words with D and E? I don't think so. So we are not used to seeing certain configurations of letters in particular positions, in particular, places in this thing. So we are not familiar with the orthography of Czech language, even though we know the individual sounds of symbols, right? So it is not just the individual sounds that our brain is retrieving, but our brain seems to store information in orthographic chunks. When I say orthographic chunks, I mean these spelling patterns that are familiar to us. So when we are fluent, we are quickly retrieving the orthographic chunks and applying it to our reading. So even in decoding, there are levels of understanding. And we were puzzled by the meaning, etc. Now, it is interesting to note that it is not that when you're fluent you comprehend. That was what this model had led us to believe, that if I'm spending less time decoding, I spend more time comprehending, was this understanding. But there's enough literature now that shows that it is not that comprehension kicks in once I finish decoding. Comprehension at every point is influencing my decoding. And it is helping me to predict what is coming up next, and it is helping me to quickly interpret the sentence as I'm reading it. It is giving me initial draft interpretations, which will be refined. So our brain is giving us draft interpretations as we go along. So comprehension is sort of active at every point. It's not kicking in once I've decoded a word. Home. Home means a place we live in. It's not like that. Before I've read it itself, it has put it into context and it's doing that. So being able to construct interpretations of what we are reading on the go, as well as to rapidly identify word meanings, seems to enable us to read fluently. Yeah. And also there is now emerging body of knowledge that cultural knowledge and knowledge of content. So suppose to a science, I would need to know science in order to understand that. Or if I'm doing reading a text on anthropology, or as our master students in APU used to, they think they're very fluent readers until they come into our first year, and we give them a nice philosophy text, and then and all the prosody goes out of their tone because they have no idea. So content knowledge actually affects, cultural knowledge affects, etc. We need to be able to bring up to mind the world that the text invokes. Otherwise, we are not able to understand. That is why cultural knowledge, content knowledge, both are also impacting fluency. So it seems that the relationship between decoding and comprehension is far more complex than what we thought. It is not just that rapid decoding frees up resources for comprehension. Oral language seems to be a very, very, very significant sort of a contributor to fluency. It is not decoding plus comprehension. That comprehension includes a knowledge of oral language and prosody, prediction, word identification. So oral language is becoming emerging as a very, very significant contributor to fluency. Now consider that we are a multilingual country. And it's not just the 22 languages we're talking about, but the hundreds of thousands of minor languages that we have. It's not just the 22 major languages that we're talking about. We have literally hundreds and thousands of mother tongues in this country. So bear in mind that the children who are coming into our schools have this additional issue. If we just keep working on their decoding, we are not going to necessarily make them fluent readers. They have to be able to understand the language that they're reading in order to be able to predict, etc. These estimates have been given by another close colleague of us, Dheer Jingran, who works with the Language Learning Foundation. This is informal, but he's been working for decades in this area. And he estimates that 25 to 30% of children in primary school in India face moderate to severe challenge simply because of language differences. And this applies to about 90% of children in low fee paying private schools, which give English medium education. And it also applies to 80 to 90% of children in states with a high number of tribal languages like is really not going to be very fruitful. So, people have various pictorial depictions of the relationship between decoding and comprehension. So the most common one is of two pillars and this roof and all of that, what I'm talking about. The house depiction. I have never liked the house depiction because it shows decoding, oral language and comprehension as two pillars. I don't see it as two pillars constructing the roof of comprehension. So I had to go online to find this representation because I wanted to show कि एक एक stitch में दोनों जुड़े हुए हैं. So I don't know what the purists will think about this, but this is how I see it. So I'm just presenting it to you as I do, that we need a great deal of oral language comprehension, background knowledge of content, vocabulary, knowledge of grammar. Why do we need knowledge of grammar for fluency? Any thoughts on that? Like, why would we need to understand the grammar? Yeah.
Words are placed side by side.
Huh? I'm sorry.
Words are placed side by side.
Words are placed side. Yeah.
In a meaningful order, should I say?
Yeah, I mean, for sentence prediction itself, we need that. No? So we are rapidly doing a number of things. We are not reading based on prediction. We are reading based on word recognition, but there's also already a framework within which we are doing the word recognition. So it provides those frameworks for making sense. Cultural knowledge, like if the text is not evoking anything in my mind, I will not be able to read expressively. So all of these things, along with phonological awareness. For those of you who do not know what phonological awareness means, it's the being aware of the sounds of spoken language. And if you don't have phonological awareness, you cannot decode very well. So phonological awareness, decoding, sight word recognition. So in India, we have taken this sight word recognition research to mean that we should start by presenting the words as sight words to children. That is not the way sight word recognition works in the brain. In the brain, children begin by decoding letter by letter. Soon they start storing little chunks like ing and the and all of those things that occur. And soon they start storing the entire word. Like if you show me the, I don't need a moment to know that it is the. I don't need to go. No, it knows. My mind knows. So that is the way you work up to sight word. It's not that you start with the sight word and break it down. So sight word recognition is also very important for fluency. So just to summarize, for fluent reading to happen, word identification processes must reach a certain minimal level of competence before you are able to understand. You have to be able to decode at a certain minimal level. Otherwise, if you're spending all your time saying, ta, ka, ka, you have no clue what you're reading. So you need to definitely have word identification at a certain level. That's common sense. Also that you need to understand the oral language to some extent. Otherwise, what are you reading? So you need to, both of these, you need certain minimal levels of competence, and then you need cultural knowledge. And another thing which I've not yet mentioned is that we forget that the reader has to be self-regulating. So if it's a child who's come and not been given any tools to sort of sit, to listen, I know people who run interventions, they spend a lot of time in the early months getting children to learn how to do school. How to sit, how to listen, how to attend, how to regulate the emotions. Otherwise, without all of this is not going to happen, no matter how much of cultural knowledge you put, oral language you put in. So all these things we need to think about. So given this context, this is my understanding of fluency as best as I could understand. I have tried to present. And now I'll get into this what do you do with fluency data? So the minute you get fluency data, everybody wants to apply it, intervene with it, create pedagogical interventions. So I thought I'll just give a couple of thoughts around that also, because the fact is that we don't have very well designed interventions in Indian context. We are learning from the West as we go, and we have to really question whether they are appropriate for our context. So one thing, usually when people are asked to define fluency, I gave you a different definition from Samuel's. Usually people will say it is pace, it is accuracy, pace, and prosody. This is the definition you will come across in the literature. And I deliberately presented it late, not early, because these are indicators of fluency and not the definition of fluency. The definition of fluency is that you're able to decode and comprehend text. The indicators of fluency are that the child is accurate, the child has sufficient speed, and the child reads with sufficient expression. Now, there is some controversy even within amongst fluency scholars whether you should put comprehension as an indicator of fluency or not. There are people who say, no, if you look at these three, if you look at just how correctly is a child reading, how fast is a child reading, and how expressively is a child reading, these three indicators correlate with comprehension. So comprehension is a different construct which these three constructs correlate with. There are others who say fluency includes comprehension. So it's not a matter of correlation. It is part of the construct of fluency. So this is a debate that is ongoing, and there are two positions on it. So there's no clarity in how we are constructing fluency itself. But as I'm telling you, no matter how we think about it, comprehension is woven into every part of it. It's just that we haven't been assessing comprehension very systematically along with fluency. So this, as I've said, I'm just repeating, a child, in order to be fluent, in order to be able to read with accuracy, pace, and prosody, needs to know the aksharas, needs to know the words, needs to know the words well enough that orthographic chunks, sight words, etc. are stored. They need oral language, they need vocabulary. And to do this, they need to be given enough opportunities to read connected texts. Connected text means not wordless, but sentences, passages with appropriate pace and prosody. So a fluent reader will not just be fluently reading wordless, but fluently reading passages. So they have to be able to read sentences and passages. Now, if you look at Western interventions of fluency, if you look at reviews of literature of fluency interventions, you will find that they assume that the children know letters and words, and they assume that the children have the oral language and vocabulary. So then all the fluency intervention is, बच्चे को अक्षर आता है, word recognition है, oral language है, अभी इनको कैसे, how do you get their pace up and how do you get their prosody up? This is the crux of the Western interventions that I am aware of. So this is not going to be very applicable or useful in our context. This is something that I just want to place before you. Because as we know, and people in this room may have 10 opinions on ASER data, I understand the methodological limitations of ASER data, but ASER data shows us that our children are just don't have letter and word recognition necessary for fluency intervention to start. When I was in the US, we used to call it fluing children, fluency intervention. So we would fluing in children. So we used to start fluing children when they knew all the aksharas. इधर तो grade 3 के बच्चे को अभी अक्षरा नहीं मालूम है सारे, एंड वर्ड्स नहीं पढ़ सकते, कहाँ से आप फ्लुएंसी शुरू करने वाले हो? मतलब थोड़ा तो दे शुड हैव सम बेसिक अक्षरा वर्ड नॉलेज बिफोर यू स्टार्ट इंटरवीनिंग एट फ्लुएंसी लेवल्स. नाउ आई मस्ट say that the ASER data coming year upon year contradicts the national assessment data, which says it's not so bad, the situation. And I know so little about NAS that people here in this room know far better than I do. You can ask them later on about why there is this discrepancy. But this is for end of grade. I mean, everybody's breaking into laughter. So 323 out of 500 scaled score is the end of grade 3 result according to NAS 2021 data, which completely contradicts my understanding, because I have done on very small samples in Maharashtra and Karnataka. ASER is telling us year upon year upon year that our children can't read, okay? And I tend to believe that. So in our curriculum, when we design textbooks, language textbooks for young children, the way we think about their language development, the learning of aksharas and matras, is that by the end of first grade, we have a very elaborate script. Everybody thinks our script is simpler than English. It is not simpler. It is less deep than English, but it is more wide. We have many symbols for them to learn. So we have got, एक वर्णमाला है, एक बाराखड़ी है, फिर हमारे पास संयुक्त अक्षर है, ऐसे बहुत सारे सिंबल्स हैं. हमारे भाषाओं में, स्क्रिप्ट्स में सिंबल्स की कोई कमी नहीं है, जितना चाहिए है. तो our textbooks assume कि varnamala they have finished learning by end of first grade, and they've also started learning matras, and by end of middle of second grade they have finished learning that also, and you can go on to passage reading. This is a curricular assumption. But even my own research that I've undertaken with Nilesh and other people shows that children know only approximately 50% of matras by the end of grade 3. 50% of matras. That means without matras, there are practically no words. So that means they can practically read only half the words. Matras, by the way, the knowledge of matras is very, very correlated in our research with being able to do word reading comfortably. And they only know 50% of matras and 25% of samyukta aksharas. So this is not a very confident child in terms of word reading capability. Sonali Nag, who is not here today, but whose research greatly informed my own thinking about how children learn scripts in Indian languages, has shown again and again and again and again in Kannada, in Bengali, that it takes 4 to 5 years for children to master alpha syllabic scripts like those. Now, you may argue with her. Please do, but with data. Please argue, but with data showing that no, in 3 years it is possible. She's looked at government schools. She's looked at not at upper middle class people's children. She's looking at government schools, the poorest of the poor, and she's saying this is how long it is taking. Perhaps a well-designed curriculum taught by very equipped teachers may be able to do it in a shorter period of time. But in any case, it's not being done in 1 year or 1.5 years. That is the point to take away from it. So again, going back to the West, to Western research, Erai's research is very influential in the West, where she said that, there are children who, they call it alphabetic. For our scripts, we'll call it aksharik, because we don't have alphabet, we have aksharas. So before a child can read, they're guessing by the shape of words or something. So they're not even attending to the letters. Then they remain in the partial alphabetic phase for quite some time, where they attend selectively to some aksharas when they are reading, but not all. Then they know all the aksharas, and but they read alphabet letters, but they read it laboriously. Ra and to the ka at. So they know all the sounds, but they're not reading fluently. This is the point when you can start fluency intervention and show people how to read, how to mind word boundaries in reading. Word boundaries means reading the word as a word and not as discrete sounds. And then you can get them to the consolidated phase and the automatic fluent phase, right? But yeah. At the end of grade 3, in the research that I did, most children were still at the partial aksharik phase. So they were not actually ripe for fluency interventions. And when we are talking about orthographic chunks, I've just put some examples here just to repeat. I'm not going to think about that. And also I've said that, so Western interventions assume that children know the letters, and Western interventions assume that children know the oral language, which we have been discussing. But we know that our children don't know the oral language also. That is all this slide is trying to point you to. So taking these two for granted, the fluency interventions in the West take these shapes and forms, some of the most common forms. So one is, it's unassisted. In an unassisted way, the child reads, and repeated reading of passages is a very well-known fluency intervention. So the child is asked to read the passage 3 to 4 times in some interventions, or until they reach a certain pace or accuracy rate. So some criteria. So the child keeps reading the same passage over and over again, and this is supposed to help fluency. There's a lot of research that shows it helps. Or There are some people who have shown that wide, silent, unassisted reading, this is very controversial what I'm telling you because this has been really pushed back on, helps fluency. That if you're a good reader and you read widely, you become fluent. But actually, people are saying it may actually work by increasing your vocabulary, not by directly working on your pace and prosody. So it has got limited use, but it is not completely useless either. But assisted methods like choral reading, which in Indian classrooms we do, the teacher reads, the children read behind. But in US, it is done almost in an eco-like fashion. So I start reading, you start reading behind me. You don't wait till I've finished and then you read. So there are various variations with assistance how you read. But then how can a teacher sort of help a group of non-fluent readers when the others are fluent and all of that? So because of that, they also started pairing more fluent with less fluent readers. It is called partner reading. They tell the children how to give feedback. They teach the children how to time, etc., etc. So there's partner reading, assisted reading. So various kinds of assisted reading strategies. Also, coming from another strand of work is something called guided reading, which again people will push back on, saying there's no scientific proof. But I'm an educator and I don't think there's a lot of scientific proof for a lot of what we do in education. So I go with what seems reasonable at times. I don't necessarily, if I were to ask for scientific proof of every single thing we did in classrooms, I would just have 3 things I can do maybe. So there's certain things we go with because we have found it to be useful in our practice. And guided reading is definitely one of those things which is very useful, where you group children in a class by fluency levels. And later Nilesh will also talk, he's worked a lot on this. You give children texts that are approximately at their levels. So when we say at their levels, we say 9 out of 10 words the child should be able to read easily. 90% or more accuracy should be there before you can do fluency instruction. So with the same passage, you cannot do with all children. So if I have group 1, group 2, group 3, each one is reading a passage at their own level, and I go around guiding them not just on accuracy, pace, and prosody, but also on comprehension, background knowledge, vocabulary. So this is guided reading, is a whole entire package of intervention that treats it in a more holistic way. Therefore, the scientific proof is less because the indicators are many. Yeah. And then, of course, there are these kinds of phrased texts, so they give children cues about where to pause. Would one of you like to try? So the single line is possibly like where a comma kind of pauses, and the double line is where the full stop kind of pauses. So would one of you like to read like a line or two? Yeah, go for it, Shakti. Following the cues there.
Yeah, all the kids were playing. It is my birthday, Pam announced to them.
Okay. Yeah. So it tells you how to phrase the text. So it is not all the kids were playing. It is my birthday, Pam announced to them. That's different. So it doesn't give you the meaning. So these kinds of things with young children, tell them how to chunk the text. So these kinds of passages are popular. I'm telling you about Western interventions. And then these kinds of things, that. Would anybody else like to read? Okay, why don't you read the he one, that one? And tell me how, the meaning that you make based on that. No? Okay, Pranjal, yes.
So he is gone.
Huh.
He is gone. He's gone.
3 different meanings. Yeah, so where we put the emphasis changes the meaning. And you all are familiar with the WhatsApp forwards of each shoots and leaves. And let's eat grandma. Let's eat grandma. Yeah. So these kinds of things you can sort of create text for children to play around with, how the expression. So I'm just giving you samples of the kinds of, I'm not getting into the details of it. So, okay. So these are the principles on which these Western interventions have been based, into which I've added oral language and all, which really they have not really focused on. And I'm saying we need to, like, building the graphophonic. Graphophonic means akshar knowledge, grapheme, phoneme, symbol, sound. We need to, in our fluency interventions in India, we need to attend to building these graphophonic foundations for fluency, which are not to be taken for granted. So we cannot take Western interventions and apply it. We have to teach decoding systematically. We need to teach the recognition of high frequency vocabulary. We need to give practice with orthographic chunks, all of that. We need to build and extend vocabulary, model fluent reading, use appropriate text. Right now we are using grade 1 text for everybody in the class. We don't have appropriate leveled text. And we need to monitor children's fluency. We need to have classroom assessment techniques for monitoring fluency. And then if we find that some children are struggling, which we will find, then we have to design and use appropriate procedures. So before we come to this last point, saying how do we intervene, we need to make sure that all the foundations for intervention are there and ready. So one last chunk of my talk, I really thank you for your patience with this, but curricular. So now I've talked about the pedagogy of it, and last I want to talk about the curricular thing, because the reason it was important for me to talk about it is because we feel that if something is shown as science, we need to apply it in our classrooms. And I say science is one source of information for an educator. So curriculum is not derived only from science. Curriculum has many sources of information. One of them is scientific knowledge. So always as educators, we have to keep the curricular objectives. Curriculum is also derived, by the way, from philosophy. What are the aims of education? What are we trying to do? It's derived from sociology. What kind of a society do we wish to create? It is not derived only from how does the child's brain work. That is only one out of 3-4 sources of information for us. So what do we want to do as society is something we have to keep in mind. So is fluency important to early reading? Yes, we have already established it's highly correlated with reading comprehension. So it's very tempting for us to conclude that fluency is important so that children can understand what they're reading. But as we are saying, it is linked to oral language. This is just like a summary slide I've created. And as educators, from a curricular perspective, we should say, we want all children to understand what they're reading. And I'll say, why? What is the aim? Because in curriculum, there's always a philosophical aim. Why do I want children to understand what they're reading? I have to answer that at a philosophical level. I want children to understand, so that they're able to use this knowledge meaningfully in their lives. And if I'm teaching them to do one thing and not completing the puzzle, I'm still not going to have very skilled students. I don't want to say skilled readers, right? So I have to complete the entire philosophical thing to answer how to get good education in the classroom. I have to say, why do I want this? Not just go blindly after this is the fluency rate, this is the comprehension rate. Why do I want? I mean, one of my very favorite examples is just get a child to fluently with comprehension read this thing. You know, I love to dance barefoot on a hot tin roof on a summer afternoon. And you can read this very fluently and you can understand. What did you read, beta? On the tin roof, it is very good to dance barefoot in the afternoon. Any comments on that? I mean, like, you want the child to work at that level of critical comprehension and critical relating it and saying, nonsense. You know, you want that kind of a reader. That's what we want. Not children who read with accuracy, prosody, pace, and comprehension. No, that doesn't complete the puzzle for me. So it's important for us to remember that remediating fluency may give us fluent readers. But when we think of pedagogical interventions, we need to keep the larger curricular perspectives and purposes. So let us just take a look at what these larger curricular aims of language education are. This is a position paper that 18 or 20 of us came together between 2014 and 2016 and put together, called the position paper on early language and literacy. It was sponsored by Care India, and Ambedkar University was deeply involved in its production. And these are the aims of early language and literacy classrooms, to create relevance. Because if something is relevant to me, I will probably keep trying to figure out how to use it. The relevance would make it usable for me. To create engagement, so it is relevant to me, now I'm engaged with it. To develop multilingual capabilities, because in our society we want multilingual capabilities. We do not want a monolingual society. We are poor society if we are monolingual. So the issue of multilingualism in our classroom is not just a challenge to be solved, it's a resource that we have to exploit as a society. It is not that we have to, अरे इतने सारे भाषा है कैसे manage करें. ये managing is one part of it, but we actually have to see this as a rich resource for us, and we want to retain this as an aim. To develop the ability to comprehend language in oral and written forms is very important. To develop a sense of aesthetic engagement. Now, for example, literature. We will never derive the teaching of literature from brain studies, from cognition. I can do as much of cognition as I want. I'll get no literature out of it. Literature is a societal, it's a human, it's a philosophical aim. So this is why I say that science cannot drive curriculum. There's so many other considerations. So we have an appreciation of beauty, and we want to keep that, and that is why literature, poetry, drama, etc. come in, and we want to develop the capabilities in children to respond to that. Yes, we have to absolutely teach them to navigate written scripts with fluency. We have to teach them how to use literacy effectively for a wide variety of purposes in their lives, and also to engage critically with what they are reading and writing. So all of this. Now, if you look at where does fluency, the fluency piece of this fit in, one, definitely number 6, to learn to navigate written scripts with fluency. And 2, as I've told you multiple times today, it is linked deeply with oral language and comprehension. So I've put, but there it is not that it helps comprehension, but comprehension helps it. So I put a bi-directional arrow. So it's both ways. Fluency has a strong reciprocal relationship with oral language and comprehension. So yeah, so to sum up my talk, fluency is one very important indicator of early literacy. But to build fluency, we have to look carefully at how we teach decoding, word recognition. We are not doing a good job. So before we go to fluency interventions, really let us talk about decoding interventions. Build oral language capabilities. Let's please talk about how to do that. And then we can say, how do we build fluency with passage reading, which is very important, that we give children opportunities to read leveled passages at different levels of difficulty for each child, for each child or group of children within the classroom. And we cannot afford to make fluency into the only thing we work on. Fluency is a proxy variable. Proxy means it stands for something else. And that something else has to be all of this for me. It has to be one proxy for all of this. So we cannot afford to make fluency into the only thing we work on in our classrooms. If children are fluent readers, they may still not be very literate people in the broader sense of literacy. When we say we want literate citizens for our democracy, the foundations are established in the early years. So we have to keep the overall aims. We have to simultaneously build comprehension, listening comprehension, reading comprehension, content knowledge, cultural knowledge of school textbooks, literary appreciation, writing, which we have not talked about, to express and communicate. It's not just fluency that matters. Modeling purposes, opportunities for critical thinking. And as I've mentioned earlier, self-regulation is coming up more and more in the literature as a very, very important variable. So then, how do we place an app like TATA? Why am I very excited? I mean, today, hearing me, you'll almost think that I'm saying fluency ka ek hi itna hi jagah hai. So then why have I come from all the way from Bangalore to Mumbai? I'm still excited enough to be here today, and I want to discuss fluency with you. So clearly it is not irrelevant in any way. It is a very, very relevant thing that you are all doing. So I feel that, I'm just putting my thought out there. I would hate for an app like TARA, which has the potential to give us large-scale data in our country, being co-opted by people who will use it to give report cards to the nation. I don't think that this should be used for that purpose, because fluency is a very weak report card, very weak as an indicator of overall literacy levels. Instead, I would love to see it being used for generating valid, reliable norms norms, fluency norms are so useful for classroom teachers. You know, when we were in the US prior to the time when they also started using it as a report card indicator, we used to have these large scale data on children that gave us fluency. If you look at that, that is Hasbrook and Tyndall. This is the 2017. We used to work with their 2006 data set, where if you look at it, they have, you know, when they say fall, winter, spring, like you have 9 months of the school year. So you just think first 3 months, second 3 months, last 3 months. And you have the data for all the percentiles. So I'll just move. Can I move from the mic 1 minute? For example, if my but from there I won't be able to manage.
Check.
Yeah. So if we have a child reading at 29 words per minute, it is not just 29 grade 1. It's not like that. So 29 grade 1 child is at the 50th percentile. For winter means the second, third. If there are 3, so then I will be able to know that if the child is reading 29 over here, there is a problem. So you're able to see by percentile also, and by the point of the school year. Grade 1 is not one thing, you know, it's quite a number of months of change and development in the child. So this kind of data, we used to find it extremely useful in classroom interventions, in designing classroom interventions, because I could say, you know, what would be my goal if my child is at 25th thing? Maybe then I'm not trying for this one number for everybody. I'm just trying to get them up to the next next level. So it is realistic and it is based on each child's level. So I would love to see, and for these kind of norms to be established, we need large scale data. Another thing which I've not mentioned today, which is extremely important, is that fluency is not one number across languages. Every language has its own fluency rate, because, for example, there are Telugu speakers here who would know that for example, Telugu is one of the most agglutinated, we call in terminology, languages, where many word meanings are squished into one word. So they've got that long a word. And then you have Hindi with Ram. And it's like not fair. You know, everything about Ram would have been expressed in one word in Telugu, you know, and then you're saying this. So I think the government understands this. So they undertook something called the FLS study in 2022, but we don't have enough of the technical details. So they have established norms in 22 languages, but it's a single number per grade level. And we do not have the technical details of that study. So we can't comment either way on what they have done. So I would like to see TATA, for example, being used to generate this kind of large-scale things. Start with one language, start with two, but over time to establish reliable, valid norms. Another use is classroom use. So if Nilesh is working in a classroom and to group children, we used to have what we called informal reading inventories. Informal reading inventories where a teacher would give a passage to a child and mark manually the running records and ask a couple of comprehension questions. On basis of that, for 30 children, they would develop 3 or 4 groups. This will make it so easy for classroom grouping and regrouping, rather than expecting teachers to do manual running records, manual passage selection, etc. So these two uses, I put only one here, I'm sorry, but I really would like to see it being used in both ways, I think are very valid uses for this. Yeah, so that is, I mean, this is the summary. I'm done now. So what is fluency? It's a complex construct that includes both automatic word processing strategies and comprehension at the same time, not one following the other. Unfortunately, we are only focusing on ORF. We're not thinking about oral language, reading comprehension, etc. And given multilingual nature of India, it is very, very important to focus on oral language and comprehension very much. And while fluency interventions are necessary, we should not be designing fluency interventions without taking these other aspects into consideration. And apps like TATA are very welcome, but please, my recommendation would be to add comprehension assessments to it, and to use it in ways that are actually useful to children and teachers. Thank you.